Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for being here. It's now 10 a.m. and I am calling the meeting to order. With our agenda posting, we invited members of the public to view a broadcast of the executive committee meeting, which is live at www.youtube.com/State Bar of Texas. We also provided instructions on how to sign up to speak at today's meeting. Sign-ups to speak remotely were available until 5 p.m. Central time yesterday. Members of the public will speak under agenda item 3, and those members of the public joining remotely will remain in the Zoom waiting room until it is your turn to speak. Please note that this meeting will be recorded and the recording will be made available to the public. Now I'll call on Executive Director Trey Appel to call the roll.
Good morning, directors. When your name is called, please answer here. Director Baruch. There. Director Cavillo. On his way. Director Cardenas. Here. Director Clark. Here. Director Barunda Firth. Here. Director Forbes.
Here.
Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Huddleston. Here. Justice Lehrman has an excused absence. Director Rispoli. Here. Director Ritter. Here. Director Michael Smith.
Here.
Director Todd Smith has an excused absence. Director Tisdale.
Here.
Director Toby.
Here.
Director Vargas.
Here.
Director Wooten.
Here.
Madam President, we have a quorum.
Thank you. That brings us to agenda item number 3, remarks from the general public. At this time, we would welcome any members of the public who have signed up to speak. Any member of the public joining us in person who wishes to speak should sign a blue sign-in card and return it to our staff. If there is a specific topic of discussion or agenda item you would like to speak on, please list that on the card. If any members of the public have signed up to speak remotely, you will remain in the Zoom waiting room until it is your turn to speak, and I will address you to indicate when you may begin. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes to speak, and we will notify you when your time is complete. Are there any members of the public here who wish to speak? Seeing none, we will move on. During the remainder of the meeting, if there are board members or staff who wish to speak, please approach the podium and I will let you know when it's your time to speak. That brings us to agenda item number 4, which is the report from our Executive Director, Trey Appel.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning again, directors. Want to bring you up to date on what's on the horizon in terms of scheduling. We're looking forward to traveling to Waco later this month for our board meeting. And while we're there, we will host a free in-person CLE on April 27 for our solo and small firm practitioners. The tradition of holding a free CLE in conjunction with the State Bar board meetings started in 2013 under the leadership of President Lisa Tatum, and we are happy to continue it. I want to thank President Gibson, Chair Baruch, and directors Lawrence Morales, Kimberly Pack Wilson, and Dwight McDonald for agreeing to speak at this event. Attendees will receive 2.5 hours of CLE credit. Registration is open now on the Texas Bar CLE website. Also on the horizon, we're excited to host the State Bar annual meeting here in Austin this year. The conference is scheduled for June 22, 23 at the JW Marriott. If you are interested in sponsorships, please let us know. Also, planning is underway for this year's local bar leaders conference, which will take place July 21, 22 at the Westin Galleria in Houston. As you know, this is a wonderful conference that brings together local and specialty bar leaders, young lawyer affiliate leaders, and access to justice delegates from across Texas to share information and ideas to help them better serve their members. The conference is one way the State Bar meets its statutory purpose of encouraging the activities of local bar associations. On the member benefits front, we continue to provide a variety of services and discounts to help Texas lawyers in their practices. We recently extended our partnership with Fastcase to provide all active bar members with free access to fast case law alerts in 13 different practice areas. Since 2014, the State Bar of Texas members have received unlimited access to fast case nationwide legal research content service as a bar member benefit. In renewing our long-term association with Fastcase, we committed to building out the member benefit to provide additional resources. The new Texas case law alerts provide our members with daily alerts and case summaries in 13 practice areas, including family law, business law, and personal injury law by drawing on Texas trial and appellate courts. And earlier this year, the State Bar of Texas member access was expanded to include briefs, pleadings, motions, and orders sourced by Docket Alarm and within the Fastcase platform. An update on our State Bar digital archives efforts. Prior to the establishment of the State Bar of Texas in 1939, the Texas Bar Association was the primary professional organization for attorneys in Texas. I'm pleased to report that the complete Texas Bar Association meeting minutes from 1930 to 1940 are now available in the State Bar of Texas digital archives. These minutes reflect the actions of the Texas legal community in the early 20th century. They also document the dissolution of the Texas Bar Association and the creation of the State Bar of Texas. Also, volunteer and staff guides from 2004 to the present are now available as part of the digital archives. These guides are useful for understanding the bar's organizational structure and administration. And since I served on the board of directors in 1994 through 1997, I'll be working on going back at least that far to make sure that we're included in that. So kudos to our archives department, Trina Purcell and Keely Drummond, for their work on these projects. You can access all of these resources at texasbar.com/digital archives. Madam President, that completes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trey. Any questions or comments from any directors regarding our executive director's report? Seeing none, we'll move to agenda item 5, which is my report. I have been busy since I last saw you, especially since I didn't get to see you in January. It's a very different feeling at this executive committee meeting when you're sitting in this room by yourself with only a few other people and all of you are on Zoom, and I much prefer being here with you in person. So I'm delighted to be here. So some of the things I've been up to since I last saw you. From February 1st to February 16, we attended the National Conference of Bar Presidents and the ABA mid-year meeting in New Orleans. Our executive director, Trey Apfel, and Cindy Tisdale and I were there representing the state of Texas. And those meetings are always very beneficial. We learn a lot from other bar leaders. We learn best practices. And I think most importantly, what we see is that the trends we are seeing in the state of Texas with regard to our lawyer population are the same trends that others are seeing as well. And so it's very good to be able to share the information about what our members are going through and our solutions for helping them be better lawyers and have better health, good health, and to help us be better bar leaders. And so that was a very productive meeting in New Orleans. Kim Askew was the leader of our ABA Texas delegation for the last time. I understand that she is term limited after, I believe, serving 6 years, but Texas is in good state because retired District Court Judge Laura Livingston has graciously agreed to assume that role as head delegate for the state of Texas. So I know we will be in good hands. And thank you to Kim Askew for her many, many years of leadership. On Saturday, I believe that was March 4, I was able to join Leadership SBOT in Galveston. And it was such a pleasure to be with those leaders. We had Pam Benson Owens, who's the consultant with Edge of Your Seat Consulting. You'll remember that she addressed us in El Paso when Sylvia Firth hosted us at the April board meeting there. And she always does a fabulous job. And I was so honored to be a witness to the magic she worked with those young lawyers. They are going to be a tremendous asset to our bar. They're so engaged and mature beyond their years. And so I'm excited, and I was delighted to be part of that group. I also on March 3, I had the opportunity to address the Texas women lawyers at their annual meeting in the Woodlands. And it was a really dynamic group of women. And the focus of a lot of the discussion was attorney wellness. And so that really is a message that TYLA President Michael Ritter, sorry, I can't get the Ritters, the non-brother Ritters, Michael Ritter and I have been working on, and I think that our message is resonating among our lawyers, so I was glad to see that. I also had the privilege of, on March 24, being here in Austin, giving the keynote speech at the Texas Board of Legal Specialization induction ceremony. And I'm very proud that our very own General Counsel, Ross Fisher, was recently inducted into that group in the legislative and campaign law group. And I think there are only about 8 or 9 folks in your category. 12 total in that category. So it's a relatively new specialization area, but being in that room with the people who had worked so hard to become board certified and their families was really touching. And it just reminds me of the importance of board certification. If you haven't thought of becoming board certified, you might. It's a small portion of our Texas lawyers, but it's a way for those leaders to show that they are leading our population and being experts in their profession. On March 25, I had the honor of going back to College Station, my alma mater. And I'd been there in 2017, and we were in Bryan just recently for our January meeting, but the campus has grown considerably since then with a new hotel where I gave my remarks. I spoke about the Texas State Bar update and talked to them about succession planning, lawyer wellness, and grievance education. There were about 85 or so lawyers in attendance, and our comments were well received. I had lawyers offer to volunteer for TLAP to be peer support people. I had lots of questions. I think people were really interested in what the bar is doing, and were very receptive. Then probably the hardest week of my tenure as president was last week, because Trey Atfel and Cindy Tisdale and I got on early flights to Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, March 27, and we were on a forced march, Monday, March 27, Tuesday, March 28, Wednesday, March 29. We did ABA education about the importance of legal service to the poor and the funding for the Legal Services Corporation. Then we had the great privilege of attending a reception at the United States Supreme Court. We tried to take a photograph with one of the justices. I'll let Cindy tell you about how that went later. And then on March 28th and 29th, we had meetings with our legislators. It was very productive. Chris Ritter, the right Ritter this time, was with us. He is taking some responsibility for the access to justice and kept us all in good order with all the materials that we needed, along with the Access to Justice group. And it really was very rewarding. And I feel like our presence there made a big difference. We're trying to increase the funding for the Legal Services Corporation from $560 million to $1.56 billion. President Biden has budgeted in his budget $800 million for legal aid, and we are hopeful that we demonstrated the great need, especially in the state of Texas, for our lawyers. We are only serving 8% of the people in Texas who qualify and are eligible for legal aid, and no matter what your standards are, 8% of your service is simply unacceptable. And Texas lawyers go a long way to filling that gap. I think in a 2021 study, it was shown that lawyers contributed something like $2.3 million in pro bono time for our citizens. So lawyers are doing what they can. We also have the option of checking the box and making a voluntary donation of $150 when our dues statements come out every year. And the time is now to make sure that we increase our efforts in that regard. So to the extent that you have contacts with legislators, please reach out to them, send them a note, tell them that the state of Texas is watching and that we're counting on them to fund the needs of the Texas citizens who need access to justice. So then finally, as I said, it was the hardest week of the presidential year so far. That culminated on Wednesday, March 29, when we got on a 6:35 flight from Washington, D.C. and flew about 5.5 hours to San Diego, California, arriving at midnight D.C. time, and then being up the next morning for the first day of the Western States Bar Conference. Many of you know Texas is really fortunate because we sit both in the Southern District, Southern Conference of Bar Presidents and the Western Conference of Bar Presidents. And these are truly working trips. We meet and hear speakers and network with one another and again, learn best practices. And even more than at the Southern Conference that we were at in October, we saw that all of the states in the Western states are really focusing on lawyer wellness because that's something they're noticing is a big issue as well. And we really enjoyed and learned from our time on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, we were in meetings. And so back to Houston on Sunday and then here on Monday night. So that was kind of back to back to back. In terms of my update with regard to my presidential initiatives, I think they're making a difference in educating our members about succession planning, lawyer well-being, and the lawyer discipline system. In January, the third of our free CLEs related to my initiatives became available on Texas Bar CLE's website. I joined Greg Sampson, who's a Gray Reed senior counsel and a former director of the State Bar of Texas, for a webcast on succession planning essentials titled Don't Wait, Designate, excuse me. That program is accredited for 1 hour of CLE ethics credit. We have had almost 6,500 registrations and views of that since January. So that's a good number of people who are focusing on that. Our previous webinars are suicide and depression prevention. And speaking of that, I neglected to mention that on March 22, I introduced Amy Grosso for a TLAP Wellness Wednesday webinar. And she talked about the importance of speaking on suicide prevention. And if you haven't seen that, she did an excellent job, probably a better job than I have ever seen of just bringing it down to the basics. And I think when I contemplate speaking to somebody who I fear might be at risk of death by suicide, it scares me because I don't want to say the wrong thing. But what Amy taught us is, as long as you are non-judgmental and caring, you are not saying the wrong thing. You will not put an idea in someone's mind to take their own life. But if you show them that you are there for them, that you care, that help is available. And she asked us to imagine the point in time in our life where we were in the most pain, and I think she was talking primarily physical pain, but when we were at the most pain in our life and being asked to do something simple like provide directions to your home. And the point was that when you are in so much pain, you can't think clearly. And so if someone is in that much pain mentally, they need someone who can help them think clearly to show them that there are options available. So I highly commend that presentation to you. It was a really impressive job that she did. So our suicide and depression prevention video that we did called Just Ask, How We Must Stop Minding Our Own Business in the Legal World. We have had almost 22,000 of our members watch that webinar. My December column of the Texas Bar Journal was called Securing Your Own Oxygen Mask First. And the number of responses I got from lawyers who identified and related and were appreciative of us modeling behavior was really very, very heartfelt and very important to realize that so many of our lawyers are suffering and speaking out finally about burnout and vicarious trauma. And I think importantly, we need to stop acting like it's a badge of honor when we work ourselves to the point where our health is suffering. That is not a badge of honor. That is a way to kill yourself. So please try to encourage that dialogue. And then finally, the Understanding the Attorney Grievance System webinar we did called What Every Lawyer Should Know About the Attorney Grievance System. which has been available since November 4, has had almost 11,000 views. Update on at-large director appointments. As you know, there are 4 at-large director positions on our board. At the annual meeting coming up in June, the term for the position currently held by our very own David Cavillo is expiring, unfortunately. And board policy includes a process that we must go through to fill David's huge vacuum. December 1 was the deadline to submit nominations to the State Bar for an at-large director position. This year, 9 nominations were received. The ad hoc committee to select at-large members reviewed the nominations, conducted interviews, and submitted 2 nominees for my consideration. I interviewed both candidates. Both were incredibly strong. They had tremendous experience in volunteer service. It was a very difficult decision, and I was really pleased to see that we had such strong candidates from whom to select. I selected Noelle Hicks of Houston. She's a graduate of Thurgood Marshall School of Law at Texas Southern University. She's a shareholder at Roberts, Markle, Weinberg, Butler, and Haley, and she practices property law, breach of contract, creditor's right. She's really known in the space of like condominiums and common communities, and she's been recognized for the last 2 years for the outstanding presentation at a seminar for the last 2 years in that group of people. So she truly is a leader. She's also a member of Leadership SBOT. The appointment will be presented to the board for consideration at our April meeting, and the term of that position will begin at the annual meeting. I want to thank the committee for their great work in the selection process, our very own chair, Kelly Ann Clark, and the members of that committee, Elizabeth Sandoval Cantu, Laura Pratt, Paul Stafford, and Kimberly Pack Wilson, because I know that lots of time and effort was put into that process, and we have gotten a great new addition who will hopefully be joining us in the board at our June meeting. Now I'd like to ask that we consider and discuss approval of the minutes of the January 10, 2023 Executive Committee meeting. I need a motion and a second in order to approve those minutes. Do I have a motion? And then Wooten, Director Wooten made the motion. Do I have a second? If so, identify yourself. Robert Toby making a second. All directors who are in favor of approving the January 10, 2023 minutes from the Executive Committee, please signify so by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no, nay. Hearing none, the minutes of the January 10, 2023 Executive Committee meeting are approved. Does anybody have any comments or questions for me that I can address? Seeing none, that takes us to agenda item 6, which is the report from the chair of the board, Chad Baruch.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning.
I ain't done a dang thing. That's pretty much my report. I think the only thing I did this quarter in my official capacity was to drive to Rockwall and push the president of the Rockwall County Bar Association off a podium and tell him I'm the chair. I get to introduce Cindy Tisdale when she shows up to speak in Rockwall, Texas. That I did. With regard to board communications, we've had really good progress from a number of our directors, including some people in this room, in terms of getting out and making the presentations we asked, communicating with the membership. David Cavillo, in particular, has led the charge. But we've had some others. The third year class has been very, very active in this regard. I plan to perhaps put a little pressure on the first and second year director classes in Waco to up their game a bit. And the only thing I'm going to remind directors when they do those appearances, I mean, we have the ready-made kits, so it's pretty low stress, but please, I do this every time I make any type of a presentation anywhere related to the State Bar of Texas, is to just make a personal ask on behalf of the Sheeran Crowley Trust. So if I go out, I went up to Smith County not long ago to do a CLE for them. And I said, the cost of my driving out here for free, 2 hours to come see you is, I need you people to help us replenish that trust. So let's all try to remember to support President Gibson in that effort. Last agenda on my item on my agenda, we were supposed to have a chair election in April, but I've decided I like the job. So I am soliciting volunteers for my coup. So anyone who wants to help me in that, see me after. But if that doesn't happen, if I'm unsuccessful in my conspiring, then we will have an election at the board meeting in April between Ken Wooten and Dwight McDonald, both of whom I think we all know would make an outstanding chair for next year. That concludes my report, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brook. Any questions for our chair of the board? No, okay, well, that takes us to agenda item 7, report from President-elect Cindy Tisdale.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning.
Morning.
Well, like President Gibson, I've been a little busier than Chair Baruch. He did a great job introducing me, by the way. Nothing, I paid him well to not embarrass me. So the functions that I'm just going to kind of run through that I've been involved with since the last time we met. I, along with President Gibson and Trey Apfel, we attended the Austin Bar Gala on behalf of the bar. I attended the National Conference of Bar Presidents and ABA meeting, like President Gibson said, in New Orleans. I just want to reiterate, these conferences are amazing. They're not just we get to go to New Orleans. We have these meetings and conferences in small groups with the other bar presidents, and in my case, the president-elects, and we learn from each other and get great ideas and come back to the bar with them. So I did that. I spoke at the Rockwall County Bar Association on my Ted Lasso speech. So I presented that to them. I did the Dallas Bar Association inaugural ball for Cheryl Murray when she became president of the DBA. I was there on behalf of the bar again, along with President Gibson and Trey Apfel. We all attended Travis Sells' funeral. And for those of you that did not attend, it was a wonderful, Jim, I'm sorry, I don't know if I said Travis, Jim Sells' funeral. It was a wonderful memorial. And what I want to say is Travis did a great job on the eulogy. I'm sorry, I had him in my mind because he did such a great job. And so we attended on behalf of the bar for that funeral. I attended the Louise Raggio Endowed Lecture Series at SMU. Amal Clooney, Robert was there, Amal Clooney spoke. Fan. I am now a huge fan of Amal Clooney. She is one of the most intelligent, well-spoken people I've ever come across and had the pleasure to hear. So you can ask Robert, I think he felt the same. So it was a great lecture. I attended the Bar Leadership Institute in Chicago. That's for president-elects, and Trey Apfel was there also. Again, that's a great opportunity for the president-elects to talk about our upcoming years and what to write in the Texas Bar Journal and our articles every month and the initiatives and the things the bars are facing all over the country. So that was a great opportunity to talk to all of them. I also spoke to the Panhandle Family Law Association via Zoom while I was in Chicago on Ted Lasso and what would Ted Lasso do. I also spoke to the Southwest Louisiana Bench Bar Association. I've become good friends with their president-elect, and I was asked to present with her on what would Ted Lasso do to the Louisiana bar. So I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. What else? I attended the 10th Court of Appeals Centennial. They had their centennial celebration in Waco 2 weeks ago. Time has stopped for me, about 2 weeks ago. It was very well attended. I attended on behalf of the bar, and it was very appreciative that we did, but to see all of the past justices, current justices, and the law clerks. It was a huge group, and it was a great time for them to celebrate their centennial. I also attended the ABA days in Washington, D.C. So I'm not going to go into that, but it wore me out. As far as trying to take a picture with Justice Kennedy, I was not thrown in jail. That's the good news. But no, apparently you don't take your pictures with the Supreme Court justices, even though everybody around me was. But it's all good. I think there's a picture of him doing this and me going, oh my gosh. So there's that picture. We attended the Western States Conference along with President Gibson and Trey Apfel. I'm not going to go into that. I think President Gibson said it very well of the great things we come out of that. And then this morning, I attended the public hearing on the budget for the 2023-24 year. And I'll talk about that here in just a minute. So that's what I've been up to. So let's discuss the proposed budget for the fiscal year 23-24. That has not changed since its presentation during the January board meeting. And in your packet, that includes a copy of the proposed budget as published in the March issue of the Texas Bar Journal. The State Bar's Our Finances webpage includes a detailed report on the proposed fiscal year, 23-24 budget. This document includes a summary of each individual budget of the State Bar and a breakdown of the revenues and expenditures by each budget. The public hearing on the State Bar's fiscal year 23-24 proposed budget was held at 9 a.m. this morning at the Texas Law Center. There were no members of the public that were present and no questions at that time. A motion will be made during the April board meeting to obtain board approval to present this proposed budget to the Supreme Court, and pending that approval, the meeting will be held with the court on May 15th. So the State Bar, let's talk about the State Bar financial trends and projections. Including in your materials is a document titled State Bar of Texas Financial Trends and Projections. This document analyzes the State Bar of Texas's key financial trends and projections, and the Budget Committee met on March 20th to discuss the key points of this document. A detailed presentation of the trends that's going to be made at the April board meeting, at the Board of Directors meeting. But some of the key points that discussed by the Budget Committee were, number one, of course, revenues keeps the bar financially stable. 2, budgeted expenditures are projected to exceed budgeted revenues. Number 3, current operations are not sustainable from current projected revenues. Number 4, growth of significant revenue resources is expected to slow. And number 5, expenditure growth is expected to rise due to inflation, cost of living, and competition for employment in Austin. The Budget Committee plans to meet in May to review information on the State Bar's significant revenue sources and to determine what additional revenues will be needed to address the projected budgetary shortfalls. So let's go on to some other news. The State Bar, the Committee Review Task Force. We have completed our review of the bar standing committees, and we have some proposed changes to present to you today. If you'll recall, the State Bar Act requires that the State Bar Executive Committee conduct a comprehensive review of all of the standing committees biannually to determine 2 things. Number 1, whether there is a continued need for each committee, and then number 2, whether there is unnecessary overlap of committee activities. So the task force met with committee chairs and staff liaisons to review the activities of each committee over the past 2 years. We're very pleased to report that the standing committees have been doing a great job in working on activities and projects that pertain to the mission and overall purpose of the State Bar Act. There's no significant overlap on the committees, and there is a continuing need for all current committees. A copy of our report is included in the executive committee packet, and it details our recommendations, which I'm going to summarize. So number 1, we're recommending amendments to the purpose clauses for several committees, including the Disability Rights and Issues Committee, the Jury Service Committee, and the Laws Relating to Immigration and Nationality Committee. And that's in your packet. For the Professionalism Committee, we're recommending that we expand the scope of the committee to include civility. This change will emphasize the importance of civility in the profession and encourage the committee to continue to find ways to promote civility. We recommend 2 things for this committee. Number 1, the name of the committee should be changed to Professionalism and Civility. And number 2, that we amend the purpose clause to incorporate the concept of civility. Next, our final recommendation to this committee is to implement term limits for the leadership of the standing committees. That's the chair, the co-chair, and the vice chair positions. This concept was raised during the last committee review task force in 2021, and we've been looking at it very closely this year. We recognize that there's a balance between needing to have the experience in that chair position and also needing to rotate and allow new leadership, new thoughts, and new blood and ideas into that chair in the leadership positions. We've noticed that many individuals in these leadership positions have served more than 3 years consecutively in that leadership position, and sometimes much, much longer than that, especially with the pattern jury charge committees because of the nature of that work, of course. We appreciate all of these individuals for serving for so long, and we recognize that they've provided valuable continuity in their respective positions. However, the downside to that, of course, is you're not able to rotate new people into those positions. It becomes difficult to maintain consistency across the committees in terms of how long they get to serve. When I sat down to work on these committee appointments, you can really start to see the differences in these terms. I see Sylvia shaking her head, and I'm sure President Gibson would agree. And I felt there was a little need to have more consistency across all of these platforms. So the task force has developed specific recommendations for term limits, and there are 2 elements for this. Number 1, for most standing committees, there should be a limit of serving no more than 3 consecutive years in a leadership role. Once they hit that point, a new person would be appointed. We thought this would be a good place to draw the line, giving someone a good amount of time to both serve as chair and also allowing for working as a transition to new leadership. For the pattern jury charges and real estate forms committees, we recommend that their term limit be 6 years for the leadership positions. These committees produce written materials and are very hardworking, project-heavy committees, and it's necessary, we thought, for them to have longer terms in leadership for that purpose and to keep that continuity of leadership. Once these term limits have been reached, they must wait 2 years before they can be eligible to serve as chair or in a leadership role again. To implement these changes, we've drafted proposed amendments to the board policy manual. We received input from Director Wooten, who is the chair of the policy manual committee, and these amendments are included in your written report. Another thing to keep in mind is that there are term limits already in place for members of these committees. Members of most committees can only serve 2 consecutive 3-year terms. And for the PJC and real estate form committees, they can only serve 3 consecutive 3-year terms. So we already have a mechanism in place for the committee members to have those limits. And this proposal will now allow kind of the same thing for the leadership for those committees. One final thing I want to point out is that we included highlights of the projects that were being done by various committees. That's in your packet. There's a lot of great work that these volunteers are doing, and they're putting out some great work. We wanted to highlight some of that for you, so it's in your packet. I won't go over that today, but that concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but we do recommend that if the proposals are approved, they become effective June 1st in conjunction with the bar's fiscal year. So
before she makes a motion, are there any, and thank you for that report, Cindy. Before we have a motion, are there questions with regard to President-elect Cindy Tisdale's general report or with regard to her budget report? Seeing none, I'll take you back to the committee review process.
Thank you, President Gibson. So at this point, I move that the executive committee approve the recommendations of the committee review task force as noted in the written report.
And coming from a committee, no second is needed. Is there any discussion with regard to the proposed changes to the committees? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the committee review task force recommendations signify the same by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by saying nay? Hearing none, the motion passes.
Thank you, and that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. That takes us to agenda item 8, our report from our immediate past president, Sylvia Baronda-Hur. Sylvia.
Good morning. Thank you, President Gibson. I'll tell you, every once in a while, I feel kind of jealous because, it's the last COVID president. I didn't get to do a lot of the things that they get to do, but then the reality sets in and we're hearing all their activities. And so thank you both. Thank you, Trey. Thanks for all and I always tell Trey, Trey's stuck on this little treadmill. The president, you're the president for 1 year and then you're gone. Trey keeps doing the same stuff every single year. So we owe a debt of gratitude to Trey, which we all know, but thank you. Well, much like Chad, I haven't been real busy since we last met, but I did participate in something that was pretty exciting And I think I'll share with you that remember we talked about Director Elizabeth Sandoval Cantu was talking about the Women History Month and the activity that the section, Women in the Law section was planning. And it was quite a success. They were able to corral 14 cities to have an event at the same day, at the same time, except for El Paso, because we were on a different time schedule. But 14 different cities came together to celebrate Women's History Month. And part of it was to talk about the section, encourage women to get involved in the state bar. And apparently we've had some great success getting women sign up for sections, et cetera. So look for that to be an event in the future. We already have plans. We were able to raise a lot of money where we even have some money squirreled away for next year to make it an even bigger event. So that was a lot of fun for all of us. And the only other substantive thing that I've been working on for the State Bar since that time is the Planning Committee. So I'm pleased to bring you a report on behalf of the Planning Committee. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to get ready for this big project. So the first one is with regard to a geotech evaluation. As recommended by the Lawrence Group, it's our designer, a geotechnical survey of the soil underneath the 1415 building is needed to assess the nature of the soil and whether it is suitable for the construction of the contemplated building that you all approved the preliminary plans for. 2 engineering firms responded to a request for proposal on the project, and both firms proposed drilling a core sample down to 50 feet beneath the surface. The sample will be taken in the current surface parking lot area. Staff has interviewed the firms and is in the final stages of selecting which one will actually perform the work, and the proposed bids range from $8,500 to $11,000. The analysis will take several weeks of review, and the firms will present a written report of its findings. You all may recall that we are researching the tax status and how we can accept the donations for the building. The State Bar's outside counsel, Dan Bauckham, submitted a request to the IRS to make a determination on the tax deductible status of donations to be made to the State Bar. The bar has not yet received a response from the IRS, but expects to receive one in the next few weeks. Meanwhile, staff is exploring other alternatives regarding the tax deductible mechanisms, which then leads to the fundraising. So the fundraising, the subcommittee has continued to work with staff to develop potential fundraising program to be implemented by the State Bar, which includes recognition for donors and policies that govern the fundraising process. Staff has been researching fundraising firms, professional firms that do this, to determine whether the State Bar should consider hiring one to assist with the fundraising. And staff will consult with this fundraising subcommittee once it's done with the review to make a recommendation. And we're also staff is working with Jeff Chapman, who is our construction advisor lawyer, to work on the next phase of development with the Lawrence Group. The State Bar will contract with the Lawrence Group on schematic design, design development, site development permitting, and construction document design. One contract will be written to cover each of the phases with specific deliverables and schedule for each and the cost for each phase. The total cost of the contract is estimated to be $1.8 million to be paid in monthly increments as the work is performed for the entire duration of the project, which is estimated to be 30 months. And once the drafting is completed, staff will discuss it with the committee and seek the approval of the board of directors as appropriate. Y'all may recall that we selected the construction manager at risk delivery method, or you call it CMAR for short. The CMAR will be involved throughout the construction process. They provide professional services and act as a consultant to the owner in the design development and pre-construction and construction phases. Oftentimes, the CMAR also provides the actual construction of the project, depending on their availability, experience, and the cost. A CMAR is used to control costs throughout the project by developing a guaranteed maximum price. It's one of the reasons we selected that delivery method. The CMAR will review the architectural designs, develop their own cost estimates, and will be responsible for bidding on construction materials and with the subcontractors. This process is critical for the CMAR to set the guaranteed maximum price. For those of you who have not done this before, I'll give you a little bit of history. So it's a two-step process will be used to identify and select the CMAR. Number one, a request for qualifications will be sent to various construction managers to identify firms that have the appropriate qualifications for the project. And staff has been working with Jeff Chapman to develop an RFQ to send to a list of CMARs. The RFQs received will be evaluated, and the top ranked respondents will be selected to receive a request for proposal. And we hope to send out the RFQ in the next several weeks. And the second step of the process, the RFP, the top selected respondents will be required to submit additional information to the State Bar, including fee proposals and the general conditions prices. The State Bar will rank the respondents in the order they provide the best value based upon the State Bar's evaluations. And so this is moving along, and we'll continue to have more to report for you in the next few months. And that concludes my report, Madam President.
We'll stay here and just in case there are any questions. Does anybody have any questions for Sylvia with regard to her general report or the update on the building planning special committee? Robert Toby.
Sylvia, you may not know the answer to this question, but is there any particular concern about the soil that they're doing soil testing, or is it just kind of precautionary?
I think, and then maybe Trey or some of the staff, but I think that it's because we're going to raise a taller building, and so we need to make sure that it'll support the weight. What's, as you know, there's some subterranean things under the Capitol, et cetera. So there's nothing of a particular concern, but it's generally accepted practice to do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I just have one question.
Yes.
So I know that
Director
we need
Wu.
to raise money in order. So do we have to raise a certain amount by a certain date in order to?
Well, I'm gonna maybe staff will correct me if I'm wrong, but we have enough to begin the design phase within the budget. It was part of the approved budget, and we'll continue to be in the budget moving forward to get us started with the design, et cetera, because all of that work needs to be done before we go out and raise the money. We need to know how much we got to raise, and we need to be able to show people what it is that we are planning to construct. But we do have enough to move forward.
Any other questions with regard to the building planning? All right, that takes us to agenda item 9, which is the nominations and elections subcommittee report. And I'm guessing that Santos Vargas is making that report since Sylvia sat down.
Thank you so much, Madam President. Good morning, everyone. Exciting news. The State Bar elections for president-elect and for district director kicked off yesterday. So it's an exciting time. That said, please make sure to vote. It's important for our self-governance, like Trey has mentioned several times. So we want to make sure that we have as much participation as possible. The two candidates for State Bar President-elect, Jerry Alexander of Dallas and Steve Benish of Austin, have been campaigning all across the state and have both been doing just a tremendous job, not just at campaigning for their respective campaigns, but also as ambassadors for the bar. And so kudos to them. We don't have any petition candidates this year. In order to help our two existing candidates for president-elect get their messages out to our State Bar members, the candidates created 2 videos and 2 written messages. The first video was distributed by email and on YouTube on March 30th, and the second will be sent on April 20th. The written messages will be sent by email on April 13th and April 26th. These materials also will be shared on social media and on the State Bar website. The State Bar conducted a candidate forum with the president-elect candidates on March 10th, and it was hosted by Rocky Deer. You may know Rocky as the host of the State Bar of Texas podcast. And during that forum, the audience members were actually able to ask questions of the candidates, which was really neat for audience participation. The next forum is scheduled for today at noon. Both immediate past president Sylvia Brunda Firth and myself will be the hosts of that forum, and Jerry and Steve will both be here present at our studio, and we'll ask them questions throughout the hour-long presentation, and it'll be broadcast via Zoom. with opportunities for lawyers to ask the candidates questions as well. Both of these presentations will be available on YouTube and on the State Bar Elections page found at texasbar.com/elections. We're featuring information on the candidates in the April issue of the Texas Bar Journal, as you may know, and on the April episode of the State Bar of Texas podcast. We are sending other communications such as emails to the membership and social media posts to help educate lawyers about the candidates. And we ask that all of you, each and every one of you, help publicize the elections and help us increase our turnout as much as possible. There are also 10 district director positions that are up for election again this year. The chart of those open positions is included in your meeting materials. And there are 3 contested races, I believe, this year. The overall election ends on May 2nd. So we have approximately a month to get as many votes out as possible. And the results of the election will be released that very same night. Attorneys can vote in several different ways: by e-ballot, by paper ballot, or by going through the State Bar homepage. From what I understand, the Postal Service is taking a little bit longer to deliver mail these days. So there may be a slight delay in receiving and returning paper ballots. As a reminder, e-ballots are going to be sent twice a week by email to attorneys who have not yet voted in the election. So please be sure to check your spam filters, as sometimes e-ballots do get caught up in spam filters. So please make sure to check those. There are plenty of opportunities to vote, and we hope everyone takes advantage and participates in this important exercise of self-governance. And with that, that concludes our report. Madam President.
Thank you, Past Chair Vargas. Any comments or questions with regard to the Nominations and Elections Subcommittee? Hearing none, we are going to skip ahead to agenda item 16 so that we make sure to leave Sylvia and Santos plenty of time to get to the studio to handle their candidate forum that starts at noon. So the item 16 is the report from the legal counsel. It is now 10:52 a.m. and the State Bar Board of Directors Executive Committee will now recess the open meeting and reconvene in closed session as authorized by Texas Government Code Section 551.071 for the purpose of consulting with legal counsel regarding Bennett versus State Bar of Texas, Washington versus State Bar of Texas et al., Robbins versus State Bar of Texas et al., Harrison versus State Bar of Texas Insurance Trust, and tax law matters regarding fundraising for 1415 Lavaca, and is authorized by the Texas Government Code, Section 551.074, to deliberate regarding personnel matters. With the exception of board liaisons and section representatives, all other individuals, including non-essential staff and other guests, need to excuse themselves from the closed session. We will notify the public when we are 5 minutes out from returning to open session. It is now 11:11 a.m. and the open session of the Board of Directors Executive Committee will now reconvene. During the closed session, only matters relating to consultation with legal counsel regarding Bennett versus the State Bar of Texas, Washington versus the State Bar of Texas et al., Robbins versus the State Bar of Texas et al., and Harrison versus the State Bar of Texas Insurance Trust, and tax law matters regarding fundraising for 1415 Lavaca were discussed. No action was taken in closed session. That takes us to agenda item 10, which is the report from the Audit and Finance Committee. I'll call on Chair David Cavillo.
Thank you, Madam President, and good morning to everybody. It's my pleasure to deliver the update of the last 8 months, the first 8 months of the State Bar's fiscal year. You know that the bar has a very rigorous budgeting process. It follows very conservative principles. In fact, earlier this morning, we approved the budget for 23-24. So you have to have that long-range vision when you're looking at the budget, and you're going to see the results of that in what I have to report here with respect to the actual financial results that were budgeted back a couple of years ago when we were going through that process. The gist of it is that we have a positive variance, or things are going better than expected when we considered it many moons ago, a couple of years ago. In that, we have a positive variance of about $3.2 million so far for the first 8 months of the year. Now, that's a good thing, right? Because we're doing better than we expected. And that comes from the fact that our revenues, our actual revenues are higher than what we'd expected, and our expenditures are less than we expected. So that's a good thing. Now, where did that difference come from? The difference came from the fact that you may remember that during the pandemic, interest rates were zero. And if they could have been less than zero, they would have been there, but they were at pretty close to zero. Since then, interest rates are ticking back up, and that's hurting us in our credit card statements, but it's also affecting the State Bar's investment account, because now they're making more money than we projected way back when, a couple of years ago. So this figure looks amazing when you look at it, but the increase of actual investment income versus what we budgeted is 363% higher than we anticipated. But that's because interest rates are much higher than we thought way back when, and we were experiencing back during the budgeting process. The other increase comes from Texas Bar Journal. Things are ticking up there in advertising revenues, so that's a good thing. Those make up the gist of the increase in the budgeted revenues or the actual revenues versus budgeted. As far as the expenditures are concerned, you might expect that some expenses, some of the expenses relating to returning back to in-person training versus online, that's beginning to manifest itself, and it's beginning to trickle into the training expenditures. So you'll see those are a little higher than we'd anticipated, but still overall, the budgeted expenditures are less than we budgeted way back when. So when you look at that, we're doing quite well, Madam President. Budgets, we're a positive budget of $3.2 million. One note about the internal audit. The internal audit, the State Bar has an external audit and an internal audit. The internal audit focuses its magnifying glass on the operations of the State Bar. And currently, the internal audit is looking at these particular sections this year. They're looking at advertising revenue, client attorney assistant program, membership dues collection, and investment controls in compliance with the Public Funds Investment Act. And so they're in the midst of that. They'll have a report for our annual meeting in June. And that's it. That concludes my report. I'm here for any questions if you have them.
Does anybody have questions for David Cavillo? All right, well, that's great news. I wish my home budget was positive by 3.2 million variance. It's not doing that. So that takes us to item 11, discipline and client attorney assistance. I'll call on Director Robert Toby.
Thank you, Madam President. We basically have a general report today from the committee, and we want to talk about the possibility or perhaps probability that we'll have a rules referendum in the next bar year starting on June 1st. So right now, as y'all recall, we've passed 5 rules at the board level, 2 before, and then 3 more in our January board meeting. Right now, there are a total of 8 more rules from the Committee for Disciplinary Rules and Referenda that are under discussion. And 5 of them are going to be the subject of a public hearing next week on April 12th, if y'all are interested in participating. And then 3 more in June at a public hearing then. So obviously, we don't know right now whether any of these 5 next week or the additional 3 will come back in their current form, if they'll need to be amended in some fashion, if they'll need to be withdrawn. We just don't know that yet. But assuming that some or all of these are passed by the committee to our board in July, it will come to the DCAP committee for consideration. And then assuming that they get through our committee, they'll be presented to the board as a whole in September. And the plan would be, assuming that the board then approves those, is they would be then presented to the Supreme Court at the end of September, beginning of October, for the approval of a referendum. And if we can stick to the same schedule that we did in 2021 for the last rules referendum that was very, very successful, we'll have an election from the beginning of February to roughly the beginning of March. And so the rules would then be hopefully approved by the bar membership at that time. And the plan is to try to stick to that timeline that was done in 2021. It seemed to be very successful. It gave us the opportunity to approve the rules in the September meeting and then have an extensive education period from the end of September all the way through the end of the voting at the beginning of March. So stay tuned for more details. There is a summary in your packet of each of obviously the 5 rules that have already been approved by the board, but the 5 rules coming up next week, and then the additional 3 rules coming up in June. Again, I do think all of these are very important rules for our bar. I do think they'll benefit lawyers in a number of ways, and I hope that they are favorably considered by the membership and then by the board when this comes up in the next bar year. So that concludes my report, Madam President.
Thank you very much. You've got lots of work ahead of you.
It looks that way.
We are now at item 12, section representatives to the board. I know that Director Michael Smith is appearing via Zoom today due to a medical emergency. Director Smith, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a fairly short report today on behalf of the sections. Our sections are finishing the year strong, and everyone's getting ready for their annual meeting, elections, and budgeting for the next year. And we'll provide a more in-depth report at the full board meeting on some special projects focused on section publications. The one thing I did want to advise the committee about is that 2 of our sections have requested an opportunity to comment through our process at the legislature on the business courts legislation. They've prepared proposals and submitted those to the bar, and I don't know how that's going to be handled. Sometimes the executive committee does that, sometimes a smaller committee does, but I did want to express to the committee that we think it's important to allow sections to participate in the legislative process in the limited way that they're allowed to under our rules. We work with the sections all year to make clear what they can and can't do, and I think it's important not to break faith with them when they play by the rules and they bring the proposals to us. That's the only substantive thing that I wanted to address today. That's all I have, Madam President.
Thank you for your report, Director Smith. Are there any questions for Director Smith regarding the section report? Hearing none, we'll move to item 13, which is report from our Supreme Court liaison. Senior Justice Lerman has an excused absence, so there will be no report from the Supreme Court at this meeting, which takes us to item number 14, report from the esteemed Michael Ritter. on the behalf of the Texas Young Lawyers Association. I'm excited to know more about his movie of the month and the lessons we can all learn from it.
Thank you, President Gibson, and good morning, everyone. So in your materials, you'll see three of my columns from February, March, and this month. In February, we addressed mentor and sponsor appreciation with Josie Geller from Never Been Kissed. March's column tackles imposter syndrome with Romy and Michelle. And this month's column draws upon the inspiration of Derek Zoolander in promoting our newest resource, How Texas Courts Work. Our How Texas Courts Work program has been completed, and we have finished a promotional guide to roll out that project at high schools and to members of the public, as well as to members of the media. Thanks to Lowell Brown for helping us reach those members of the media. And we're currently promoting those aspects of the project to the members of the public. In addition, I attended on March 31st, Law Day at St. Mary's School of Law as part of T. Wiley's Pathways to the Profession efforts in coordination with the Youth Justice Alliance, the nonprofit that is led by T. Wiley Director Orman Salek. We presented to nearly 150 high school students from area high schools about different ways to become a lawyer and different types of lawyers that are out there to inspire them to consider choosing law as their career path. I'd also like to thank Eric Kutuga for an additional Texas Bar Journal column highlighting that project. In addition to rolling out our How Texas Courts Work program, we are also continuing our promotion of our longstanding prior Bar Foundation project, Teach Safe, Be Safe, Learn Safe. And since my last report, we've reached 2,947 Texas teachers who have accessed that website directly from our social media. In addition to continuing our rollouts of our ongoing projects, we've completed, my count is 9 since the last time we met. I'll address each one of those very briefly. The first is a guide to law-adjacent careers that helps members of the public learn about how to become a court reporter and court interpreter. Number 2 is we've completed our season 5 of our war stories of our Young Gunners podcast, and those are scheduled to be released once every 2 weeks on Tuesday from here to the end of the bar year. Number 3 is our online marketing video series. We have 8 how-to tutorial videos for creating branding materials, designing a website, using Canva to create promotion for CLEs, and even a how-to on how to have your attorney advertisements approved through online through the advertising review process through State Bar of Texas. Number 4, we've created a sudden loss resource for individuals who have lost a loved one, a family member who has passed on without a will, and a checklist of steps to take to address all the legal concerns that arise in such situations. A special thanks to the University Federal Credit Union and Director David Courageous for working on that project with TYLA. Number 5 is that we had our virtual ethics trivia, where we had questions from Legally Blonde, my cousin Vinny, and A Few Good Men. We had over 230 participants live in that program, which was an outstanding number. Number 6 was our national trial competition, which we held just this past week in my hometown, #remember the Alamo. And we had, so one of the fun things about national trial competition, I'll share this with you briefly, is that the TYLA committee members participate as witnesses for some of the final rounds. And to make it a little bit more interesting, historically, what we've done is we've given our committee members challenge phrases. So while they're playing this role as this witness, they have to get in a phrase or a word into their testimony, hopefully seamlessly. So some of those words this past NTC were breakfast taco, remember the Alamo, and Shamu. So national trial competition is the national tournament of over nearly 300 teams of law students competing in mock trial. They compete at regional tournaments, and then the top 30 come to nationals. So we see some of the very best, most brightest, most talented law students competing in those final round, and they're truly amazing that we have that level and that caliber of advocacy to look forward to in future generations of lawyers. Number 7 is we've revised our attorney wellness website to include more resources for what to do if someone's experiencing a mental health issue. Sometimes it's not always a crisis situation. Sometimes it's somebody who wants to be connected to help, maybe not comfortable with going through TLAP, providing a variety of options for individuals who are insured, may not be insured, maybe want to self-pay or to take advantage of the resources in the state bar, including the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program. In addition to that, number 8 is our social media campaign, It Gets Better for Lawyers, in which attorneys have shared how they've overcome challenges, mental health challenges in the practice of law, and share words of encouragement to others. I'd like to thank Director Wooten for providing one of those videos. It is forthcoming. Through those efforts, we've directed nearly 1,000 lawyers to our attorney wellness website who are getting help just within the past month alone, and almost 10,000 views of those videos from the past few weeks. So it's been highly successful so far, and we're proud to be having the impact that we're having. And number 9, just a few minutes ago, I received notification that our website has been refreshed, and that component of our website update project has been completed. In the future, we'll be working on search engine optimization efforts that, if you're not familiar with SEO, it's essentially a passive way that more people will find our resources more easily on search engines like Google. In the next few months, we're planning on having our last board meeting in May in Rockwall and wrapping up our remaining projects. So unless anyone has any other questions, that concludes my president's report.
Any questions for Michael? No. Thank you, Michael.
Shamu.
Shamu, yeah. Remember the Alamo over a breakfast taco, yes. So that brings us to agenda item number 15, discussion report from our general counsel, Ross Fisher.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Not a lot to report from the last quarter. As President Gibson mentioned, I got to hear her address the inductees at the TVLS induction ceremony, which was nice. I appreciate her being there. And then all the issues that Chris covered in closed session, we've touched base on. And I'm in contact with him to see how I can best help while his office is down one lawyer. So, all right, thanks.
Any questions for Chris? I'm sorry, for Ross. Ross. All right. That takes us to the end of our agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Robert Tobey making the motion. The second?
Second.
I got Ken and Wooten having the second. So we are adjourning at 11:28. Thank you for being